It's 1916. The trenches smell of gunpowder and fear, but reach into a British soldier's pack, peel back the silver foil, and suddenly, for just a moment, it smells like home. During the darkest days of the First World War, the Terry's factory didn't just make confectionery, they manufactured morale. It shipped thousands of chocolate pick-me-ups to the front lines, a small, sweet reminder to the boys in the trenches of what they were fighting for. The factory survived the First World War. It survived the Nazi bombings. It even survived the Great Depression. But in 2004, the factories that helped win a war were finally defeated. Not by an army, but by a boring spreadsheet. This is the story of how the heart of York was dismantled, piece by piece. It all starts in 1767 with a small confectionery shop near Bootham Bar in York, opened by Robert Berry and William Baildon, apothecaries who understood chemistry as well as flavor. Joseph Terry himself did not join until 1823, when he married into the Berry family. Over decades, he transformed their apothecary business into a chocolate dynasty. By the late 1800s, Terry's had grown into a major manufacturer, building a factory on Bishopthorpe Road in 1926 that would become synonymous with the city itself. A gleaming Art Deco building employing thousands, shaping entire neighborhoods. Inside the factory, chocolate flowed like a river. The deep hum of the conching machines ran day and night, grinding the chocolate mixture for hours until it reached perfect smoothness. The clank and rhythm of the enrobing line, where centers passed under curtains of liquid chocolate, emerging glossy and perfect. The hiss of steam from the tempering kettles, where temperatures had to be controlled to the exact degree, or the chocolate would bloom and streak. The mixing room held enormous copper vats, some tall as a man, where cocoa powder, sugar, and milk blended for hours. The mixers ran slowly, hypnotically. You could tell when a batch was ready just by looking at it, the way it caught the light, the way it clung to the sides of the vat. Old hands, like David Meek, who gave 35 years of his life to the factory, could tell you the quality was consistent, not just because of the machines, but because of the people watching them. Then came the molding halls. This was where Karen Watson made history. Starting on a 6-week contract, she stayed for 22 years, becoming the first female molding plant operator, a job previously reserved for men. Rows of machines filled orange segment molds, the liquid chocolate pouring in measured doses, the molds vibrating to remove air bubbles, traveling through cooling tunnels that brought them from liquid to solid in precisely timed intervals. The temperature had to be exact. Too warm and the segments would stick. Too cold and they would be brittle. Karen could sense when something was not quite right, adjusting before problems arose. The packing department was its own world. Miles of orange and gold foil ran through rollers, wrapping each segment, then the outer wrapping that made the orange shape distinctive. The machines clattered and hummed, but between them you heard conversation, laughter, the radio playing. It was not just a workplace, it was a matchmaking service. Dennis Wells started there at age 15, wearing overalls 3 sizes too big. The older men laughed at him, but he found his footing. 2 years later, he met Carol in the same department. They married and stayed together for decades, just one of countless Terry's marriages forged over the scent of cocoa. Break time smelled like the canteen's tea and whatever the ladies were serving that day. But underneath it all, always, the smell of chocolate. It got into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You could shower and still smell it. Children knew when their parents worked at Terry's. Karen Watson recalled that she only applied for the job because she loved how her own mother smelled coming home from the factory. Sweet and unmistakable. The smell followed them home, became part of who you were. Christmas season changed everything. From September through December, the factory ran extra shifts, production lines never stopping. People worked 12, 14-hour days sometimes, but nobody complained. The money was good, the work was steady, and there was pride in knowing that millions of families would find your chocolate in their stockings on Christmas morning. The factory employed thousands at its peak. Walk through Bishopthorpe Road at shift change, and you would see them streaming out the gates, hundreds at a time, heading home covered in the smell of chocolate and cocoa powder. Entire families worked there across generations. The Robinsons had 4 generations work at Terry's. The Thompsons had 3. Fathers passed skills to sons and daughters. Mothers trained their children during school holidays, showing them how the machinery worked, how to spot quality, how to take pride in the process. But beyond that, the community was real in ways that are hard to explain to anyone who did not live it. You started your shift at 7 in the morning alongside people you had known your entire life. You took your breaks with them, celebrated their weddings, attended their funerals. Your children grew up with their children. The factory whistle marked the rhythm of the day. 7 o'clock start, 10:30 tea break, 1 o'clock dinner break, 5 o'clock finish. The surrounding streets organized their lives around that whistle. Shop hours, bus schedules, school pickups, everything revolved around when Terry's workers clocked in and out. When someone retired, the whole department shut down for half an hour to say goodbye properly, to present a watch or whatever the collection had raised money for. These rituals mattered. They marked time. They made the work about more than just the work. Terry's created products that became institutions, but nothing defined them quite like the chocolate orange. They had tried before. The chocolate apple launched in 1926, but it failed because it could not be separated into segments. Learning from that failure, they introduced the chocolate orange in 1932, this time with an ingenious design. Chocolate shaped and flavored like an orange, divided into segments that could be tapped and separated. Simple in concept, devilishly difficult to perfect. The segments had to be identical in size and weight. The orange oil flavoring had to be detectable, but never overpowering. The chocolate had to snap apart cleanly when tapped, not crumble. Workers on the chocolate orange line knew every quirk of the process. The molds needed cleaning every so many cycles or chocolate would stick. The cooling tunnel temperature had to account for seasonal variations. What worked in January needed adjusting for July. Some spent entire lifetimes making chocolate oranges and nothing else. They took pride in consistency, in knowing that a chocolate orange made in 1975 tasted identical to one made in 2004. The recipe never changed. The process never changed. That was the point. Quality control was obsessive. Every batch was tested. Inspectors would tap the orange against the table and listen. The sound told them if segments had fused together or if the chocolate had the right snap. They counted how many segments separated cleanly. They weighed segments to ensure uniformity. The tap ritual was not theater, it was science. Rejects were rare because the standards were high and the workers were skilled. The chocolate orange became a Christmas tradition across Britain and beyond. Stockings felt incomplete without that distinctive spherical box. The ritual of unwrapping it, tapping it against a surface to break the segments apart, became as much a part of the festive season as turkey and crackers. We exported it worldwide. In some countries, Terry's chocolate orange outsold traditional orange-flavored sweets. But by the 1980s, something was shifting. In 1977, Terry's was acquired by Colgate-Palmolive, an American conglomerate better known for toothpaste. The incongruity was not lost on anyone. A soap company now controlled Terry's. The chocolate still tasted the same. The factory still operated. But decisions were now made in New York, not York. Workers felt the vulnerability, even if they could not articulate it yet. In 1982, United Biscuits bought Terry's from Colgate, bringing it back under British ownership. For 11 years, there was hope. British bosses meant someone who understood what Terry's meant to York. But in 1993, Kraft Foods bought the company from United Biscuits. Chicago now controlled what happened on Bishop Thorpe Road. American ownership had returned. The new owners talked about rationalization, about efficiency, about focusing on core brands. The workers who had spent decades perfecting Terry's products heard those words and recognized the warning signs. Then in 2000, Kraft quietly removed the words of York from the packaging. The connection to place was being erased, one decision at a time. The chocolate orange remained a success, generating reliable profits, but Kraft saw opportunity differently. Why manufacture in expensive Britain when cheaper facilities existed in Europe? In 2004, the announcement came. Kraft would close the Terry's factory. Production would move to Poland. Over 230 years of chocolate making in York would end. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning. First, the union reps were told, then department heads, then finally, the workers themselves. The shock was palpable. People who had worked there 30, 40 years stood in silence, trying to process what it meant. Apprentices who had been promised careers saw futures evaporate. The factory kept running, orders still needed filling, Christmas was coming, so they clocked in and did their jobs, but everything felt different. Union meetings packed the social club hall, hundreds attending, everyone wanting to know what could be done. But everyone understood the reality. Kraft had made its decision. In 2005, the factory closed. The final months were surreal. Workers started taking photographs, something never allowed before. People began taking small mementos, a label from the wrapping line, a mold that was being retired, a fragment of foil. Management turned a blind eye. The last chocolate oranges rolled off the production line on a September afternoon in 2005. The final shift was volunteer only, but nearly everyone came. They worked in near silence, the usual laughter replaced by heavy quiet, broken only by machinery and occasional sniffles. When the last orange was wrapped, when the final pallet was loaded onto the final lorry, the production line stopped. The silence was deafening. For over a century, that factory had hummed with life, and now it was just still. Workers stood at their stations, not quite ready to leave. Some cried. You would see grown men who had worked 40 years without complaint, standing there with tears running down their faces. Women who had raised families on those wages sobbed openly. Others were too angry for tears. They walked out together, hundreds of them, streaming through the gates one last time. Some stopped and looked back at the building, trying to memorize it. The smell of chocolate still hung in the air, sweet and familiar and heartbreaking. Workers who had spent decades there cleared their lockers, carrying their belongings in plastic bags. Photographs from the bulletin board, personal mugs from the canteen, tools they had bought themselves. The accumulation of entire working lives reduced to what they could carry in two hands. Production moved to Poland. Kraft insisted the recipe had not changed, that Polish-made Terry's chocolate tasted identical to York-made Terry's chocolate. They even sent Karen Watson to Poland to train the workers who would replace her. 22 years of expertise handed over in a few weeks, before she returned to York to clear her locker for the last time. Customers were skeptical. Some claimed the chocolate orange tasted different, less rich, the texture changed. Kraft denied everything. But how could chocolate made thousands of miles away by workers with no connection to York's chocolate heritage possibly be the same? The chemistry might match. Culture, tradition, care, these cannot be replicated in a laboratory or transferred in a shipping container. The workers scattered like seeds in the wind. David Meek, who had given 35 years to perfecting chocolate quality in the mixing room, found work elsewhere. The skills were not transferable. The pride was gone. Karen Watson, who had broken barriers as the first female molding plant operator and stayed for 22 years, had to start over. Dennis Wells and Carol, who had met in the packing department as teenagers and built a life together around Terry's, both took early retirement. They still met friends for coffee, but they said it was not the same, that something vital was missing. The younger workers, those in their 20s and 30s, fared better in some ways. They found other jobs, retrained, adapted, but they lost something too. They lost the expectation of stability, of building a career in one place. The Terry's closure taught them not to trust employers, not to expect loyalty in return for loyalty given. The knowledge they possessed became obsolete overnight. No one in York makes chocolate oranges anymore. No one knows the quirks of the Terry's process, the exact temperatures, the precise timings, the little adjustments that made the difference between good chocolate and perfect chocolate. That knowledge is gone, scattered to retirement homes and other jobs and early graves. Today, Terry's chocolate orange still appears in shops every Christmas. The packaging still carries the name Terry's, but the words of York are long gone, removed to avoid misleading consumers about where it is actually made. Walk past the old factory site on Bishopthorpe Road, and nothing remains. New buildings rise where the mixing vats once churned. Apartments occupy the space where the wrapping lines once clattered. The smell is gone. The sounds are gone. No factory whistle. No machinery. No voices at shift change. If you close your eyes on that street, you can almost imagine it. The 7 o'clock rush as hundreds streamed through the gates. The sweet smell that told you chocolate was being made. But open your eyes and it is all gone, replaced by buildings that could be anywhere, that have no history, no soul. The workers who made chocolate in York are retired now. On quiet afternoons, some still meet at the same pubs they frequented after shifts. They talk about the factory sometimes, reminiscing about people and moments. They remember the smell, the sounds, the satisfaction of a job done right. They remember colleagues who have since passed away, whose obituaries note they worked at Terry's for 40 years, as if that were the most important thing to say about a life. Perhaps it was. Some keep mementos, a photograph of their production line, a factory badge tucked in a drawer, a piece of machinery small enough to keep on a shelf. These objects mean nothing to anyone else. To them, they are proof that it all happened, that it was real. Their children work in call centers, in retail, in the gig economy. The stability their parents knew seems quaint now. The children are proud of their parents, certainly, but they cannot fully understand what was lost. On Christmas morning, when families open their stockings and find a chocolate orange, do they think about where it came from? Do they know it was once made in York by people who took pride in their work? Probably not. To them, it is just chocolate. To the people who made it, it was a life. Economic failure barely scratches the surface of what happened to Terry's. This became a cultural surrender. The factory closing meant losing the connection between the joy in our hands and the place it came from. The workers who stirred those vats, who molded those segments, who wrapped those boxes, they knew they were custodians of something special. When Kraft closed the factory, we lost those custodians. And with them, a piece of what made British chocolate extraordinary. Every element for sustained success existed. People loved the product worldwide. The factory functioned. Workers possessed generations of expertise. The brand commanded global recognition. Short-term profit calculations trumped long-term cultural value. We traded heritage for marginal cost savings and lost both. Yet in the years since, something curious has shifted. Consumers increasingly ask where their food comes from, who makes it, under what conditions. Perhaps we are finally realizing what we threw away. The chocolate itself matters certainly, but so does the principle that some things matter beyond quarterly earnings. The Terry's factory did not have to close. Choices, not inevitability, destroyed it. We lost a factory, but the memory remains. Bittersweet, like dark chocolate. What do you remember about Terry's? Share your stories below and suggest topics you want us to explore.